Wonderful. Good afternoon, all. I hope this finds you and your loved ones safe and healthy during these interesting and challenging times. My name is Patty Simonton, and I'm the director of the Be Green business program here at Bethesda Green. Thank you for taking the time today to join us for the third session of our 5-part summer speaker series, Tackling Environmental Challenges Through Sustainable Entrepreneurship. Our series continues next week, and I invite you to join us then. I'll begin by sharing today a quick overview of our work. Through our Be Green business program, we work to cultivate innovative eco-entrepreneurs and nurture the development of green businesses to ensure compatibility between economic development and environmental protection. To this end, as part of our B Corp program, we advise existing local businesses through B Corp certification and help them discover and implement best practices for sound governance, support for workers, and sustainability. Through our Innovation Lab, we are constantly on the lookout for leaders who are building for-profit business models around innovative and sustainable solutions to tackle environmental and social challenges. Since Bethesda Green launched its entrepreneurial programming in January of 2018, we've supported 18 companies, ranging from idea stage to those raising seed and Series A investment rounds. At this time, we are actively recruiting for our Spring 2021 Accelerator cohort, as well as for our Amplifier program. Entrepreneurs who are interested in joining the Bethesda Green community are invited to contact me directly to learn more. I'll add my email to the chat. Today, I am pleased to welcome a fantastic group of women who will discuss the innovations that are being adopted to curb the fashion industry's environmental impact, from small fashion startups to multi-billion-dollar fashion brands. We will also discuss the role of corporate social responsibility in helping to direct the fashion industry towards sustainable practices and the technologies and programs that can help make it possible. Amy Hall serves as the Vice President of Social Consciousness for women's clothing designer Eileen Fisher. In this capacity, she guides the company toward greater alignment with its benefit and B Corp status and Horizon 2030 goals. Amy collaborates internally and externally to position the company at the leading edge of human, environmental, and economic sustainability. An avid cyclist with a self-built bamboo bike, Amy can frequently be found cycling around New York's Hudson Valley. She also runs her own sustainability consultancy called Impactorum LLC. Danielle Nkojo is the manager of global sustainable products at Contour Brands, with a portfolio of some of the world's most iconic denim brands, Wrangler and Lee. Her 15-year career has been a steady march toward encouraging sustainable consumption and helping to build the foundation of a local circular economy. As a member of DC's urban sustainability team, Danielle worked collaboratively with other government agencies, residents, businesses, and institutions to develop policies focused on source reduction and sustainable procurement. Danielle worked to implement Sustainable DC, the plan to make DC the greenest, most livable city in the nation by 2032. Prior to joining DC, Danielle launched Perfectly Good, an online clothing reuse boutique, and led a team of recycling specialists to manage a county-wide program to promote sustainable waste management practices among the local, commercial, and multifamily sector. She spent several years as a partner in a local environmental consulting firm and has also served as DC's Brownfields Coordinator and as Assistant Regional Counsel at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. Danielle volunteers as a brand ambassador for Goodwill of Greater Washington and is a proud alum of Vermont Law School. Danielle is also a mentor for Bethesda Green's Innovation Lab. We're always happy to have our community members here. Julia Daviy is an award-winning revolutionary eco-friendly fashion designer and a co-founder of New Age Lab, where she uses her extensive background in environmental science, clean tech, and 3D printing to achieve significant reductions in CO2 emissions while creating sustainable clothing products. Her award-winning approach to sustainable clothing and accessories have caught the attention of industry leaders around the globe, and her work continues to inspire others who share her vision for a zero impact and positive impact society. Julia is the winner of the 2019 Elux Awards as Best Luxury Fashion Brand that uses zero-waste 3D printing to create gorgeous garments with materials that are not only recyclable, but also biodegradable. Daviy's products were featured during the New York Fashion Weeks in 2018 and 2019, and were featured at the Futurist Feminist exhibition at the Boston Center for the Arts, Museum of Sustainability in Miami, and Rethinking Plastics exhibition in the Netherlands. Prior to her foray into fashion, Julia spent a decade in the clean tech and renewable energy spaces, and she continues to serve as a co-founder at the IB Center, a research and consultation firm specializing in sustainable development projects. She also holds a Guinness World Record for the largest 3D printed flag. Vanessa Barboni Hallik is the founder and CEO of Another Tomorrow, an end-to-end sustainable luxury apparel company and platform for discovery and action committed to transparency and circular economy. She is also an investor in early stage companies with strong ESG commitments and potential to catalyze positive change. Vanessa serves on the advisory board for Harvard's Carr Center for Human Rights Policy and the Trust for Public Land. Prior to founding Another Tomorrow, Vanessa was managing director at Morgan Stanley, where she held several leadership roles in the emerging markets institutional securities business. While at Morgan Stanley, she served as a trustee on the board of Morgan Stanley Foundation and represented the firm at the Council on Foreign Relations. She likewise chaired the Fixed Income Philanthropy Committee, during which she initiated and subsequently led the firm's mentoring program with East Side Community High School in partnership with pencil.org. Vanessa holds a BA in economics from Cornell and is an MS candidate at Columbia University's Earth Institute. She resides in New York City with her family and 2 dogs. Today's conversation will be moderated by Kaveri Marathe, an alumni of Bethesda Green's Innovation Lab. Kaveri is a problem solver and communicator focused on changing behavior to solve environmental challenges. She has expertise in sustainability, circular economy, social impact, entrepreneurship, and communication, with experience running her own startup and consulting for the World Bank, Zinteo, UNESCO, the US Department of Commerce, and others. She's a prolific speaker and moderator on circular economy, sustainability, entrepreneurship, and textiles, having presented at Sustainable Brands, Patagonia DC, Fashion Revolution Week DC, APEC, Google, Georgetown University, George Washington University, and in media interviews for NPR, Voice of America, and Global News Canada. Wow, you all are awesome. Thank you all for joining me here this afternoon. We're going to keep this discussion going until about 2 p.m., at which point we'll open it up to questions from the audience. I invite attendees to submit their questions throughout here in the chat, and we'll try to get as many as we can. So before we begin, I invite you all to just answer a few short questions via this poll. Go ahead and launch that. Oh, it's over here. My apologies. Okay, just a couple of minutes. Are you able to see the poll, everyone? Yeah, we'll check in. I think co-host can't, for those of you thinking about it. All right, I'll share the results when they come through. I realize that you can't do that during. We have a lot of entrepreneurs in the room, which is exciting. Good to hear a lot of you do think about textile waste. And you all, wow, so far so good. All of you have chosen so far not to buy clothing because it was not sustainable enough. So that's excellent. I'll give just another 30 seconds or so. Entrepreneurs, consumers. Okay, just another 5. That's 30 seconds. Another password. All right, we'll go ahead and end the poll. Some neat results here, huh? Product materials, high on the list. Mission and reputation of corporate brand. Great. Well, I really look forward to seeing how this ties into everything. All right. At this time, Kaveri, I'm going to hand the reins over to you, and I look forward to the discussion.
Great. Thank you so much, Patty. And I'm so happy to be back, albeit virtually, here at Bethesda Green. So like Patty said, I was a fellow of the Be Green Hub back in early 2019, which now feels genuinely like a lifetime ago. My startup, which I ran for 2 years from 2017 to 2019, offered a clothing recycling service with the intent to keep old clothing out of landfills. But I faced a lot of challenges, including figuring out how to scale my business. And so I'm really happy to be back here to facilitate this conversation. so that we can really think through some of the challenges that entrepreneurs in sustainable fashion might face, as well as where some of the niches for opportunity might lie in sustainable fashion. So let me welcome all of you to be here and all of our panelists. And I'm going to kick the first question over to Amy. So Amy, in a recent interview that you did with the Social Venture Circle, you talked about the best place to start when implementing sustainability challenges is also one of the hardest, which is human behavior change. How would you say that applies to different stakeholders within the supply chain? And can you talk about any successes or challenges that you face when trying to implement that into Eileen Fisher's supply chain?
Yeah, I actually think it's really the only challenge. It's not even the best challenge. Or it's all of the problems we're trying to solve. We're human driven. It's all about all the waste we put onto the planet, into the ocean, onto the land, et cetera, and the labor issues, and every challenge that we can think of. And so, the question becomes, how do we get consumers to think differently about how much we all buy? I think that poll was very telling, and I applaud everybody here who's already thinking about all of that. How do we get our colleagues within our companies to want to maybe change their own practices, maybe things that they've been doing for years already? Now we're asking them to think differently. It's very tricky. Similarly for our suppliers, the suppliers have been in business long before we became one of their clients. And so, we have to create a good reason for them, give them a good reason to change the way they've been doing business so successfully all of these years. So every single change requires change management and behavior change. And when people come to me and people ask me, what do I need to know in order to get a job like yours or a job in sustainability? Can I go get a degree in environmental management, for example? And I'll say, yeah, that's fine. Learn all the data, learn the science, but you really have to know how to work with people and how to influence people, because if you can't do that, then nothing will change. So literally every single effort we've taken within the company as a brand has to do with changing people's behaviors. So small examples would be helping our designers to think differently about the fibers and materials they're sourcing. In the old days, that was a bit of an uphill battle. And now everybody just immediately says, first thing, okay, how can we source this fiber or fabric differently? How can we source it more responsibly? And we got to that through a series of system thinking meetings, getting everybody to understand their role within this system dynamic of making change happen inside the company. I could go on, but I don't want to monopolize the question. I'm sure there could be any number of examples that any of us could give.
Yeah, I will say that is very relevant to the work I do as a sustainability consultant at the World Bank. Even all of our staff who are very knowledgeable about environmental issues and steeped in it, it's very hard to get them just to do something simple like bring their own coffee cup to the coffee bar. So I can definitely relate to that. Maybe I will move to Vanessa on looking at supply chain and like Amy said, giving suppliers a good reason to change. How have you managed to do that with your business Another Tomorrow?
Oh gosh, such a great question. When we first approached the supply chain, we really thought, given how big the conversation was around sustainability, that we would find so many pre-existing options that both met our quality standards and our sustainability standards. And we really found that to unfortunately not be the case. There's a really big disconnect still between reality and the conversation that's happening, which is a good indication of the way things are going, but sometimes I think can lead people to think that there's been more progress than there has. But ultimately what we ended up doing was finding suppliers who had that human motivation to change and start to pilot projects with them where we could basically say, look, we'll take responsibility for the sourcing of the raw materials. We'll work with you if we need to find an intermediate input like yarn, and then let's develop something together that's custom. And it's really this kind of transference of expertise, I would say, our side on the sustainability side, their side on the craftsmanship side, once they've developed something custom for us, all of a sudden, oh, this isn't so hard. You know, now I can do this not just more for you, but for others. So it's really been kind of this idea of just multiple pilots. And so as a result, you know, we've developed essentially almost entirely custom fabrics. And on one hand, that's frustrating and it takes a long time, but on the other, we've learned so much more by the actual having to do. And, you know, a good example of that is actually our wool supply chain, where I felt very strongly, especially given the animal welfare issues, that we actually had a direct relationship to the farm. And so we would literally source the wool ourselves from 2 farms, put it on a boat, get it clean, scoured in Italy, have it, you know, spun and woven into fabric. And, you know, it really just is those constant conversations and relationships with suppliers that continue to motivate to do the hard work, and it gets easier over time.
Yeah, that's super interesting that it's really so collaborative. And maybe I'll punt to Danielle, because that's something that as a smaller brand, maybe in some ways easier to do, to sort of co-create with your suppliers, and maybe not something that's easy to do when you're a larger brand. Can you tell us a little bit about the challenges with managing a big supply chain when you are in multiple international markets and being at such a big scale as Contour is?
Sure. What I think, you know, is top of mind, and actually something I'm kind of actively working on right now, is people are really excited. The designers are really excited about hemp. And like Amy was saying, there was a time when the designers felt like sustainability was something being thrust upon them. But what's happening now is the designers are hearing about new fabrics and new techniques and are excited about using them. And so I don't want to quash that excitement in any way, but it's also like my role in the company to validate claims. So when someone says, you know, the hemp uses less water and is grown without using pesticides, it can be grown without using pesticides. It can be grown with using without using fertilizers, because it can be so densely cultivated, right? So these are all the promises of hemp. The question is, for us at our scale, how is the hemp that we're using actually being grown, right? Is fertilizer being used? Are pesticides being used? You know, how much water is being used? And so in order to validate those claims at such a scale, we have a bigger challenge ahead of us to do that. We're taking on that challenge, but that's a really good example where, you know, at scale, it's just really different. You know, I believe it was, is it Vanessa that talked about like 2 farms and, you know, bringing the wool and spinning it into yarn. And while we're doing some pilot projects like that, our larger supply chain, we just aren't there yet. And so we are working on building up our capabilities around traceability so that we can do that. But we want to make sure that, you know, the hemp or the cotton or whatever the fibers are that we're using, those claims are actually validated and traceable. So that's a bigger challenge when you're talking about the scale that we're working at.
Yeah, and so maybe I'll ask you a quick follow-up, and then we can push to Julia to touch on this. But what kind of role do you see new technologies like in traceability sort of playing and being able to achieve some of those sustainability goals?
Yeah, I'm actually going to have to figure out what blockchain is, right? And so absolutely looking at different technologies, looking at traceability down to the seeds, right? We're talking, you know, BASF has made a number of achievements around traceability around some of their cotton seeds. So that's like a really interesting conversation to have and to explore, if we can trace them back, not just to the supplier, but actually we get farm level data on the fabrics that we're getting. And so those are the interesting conversations that we're having now. But again, because of our scale, you know, this is something that the public may not see from us for years to come because of the scale and the validation process that we have to go through.
Yeah, it's super interesting. So maybe we can ask Julia, who's looking at kind of the other end of the scale of the spectrum, a little bit about the technology that you've developed in 3D printing garments, and sort of what that journey has been like, and how you see technologies like that playing a role in the sustainable fashion space.
At the very beginning of my fashion journey and my desire to create sustainable garments, I launched the brand of activewear made of organic fabrics. So I simply realized with that project that it's really hard, probably impossible to achieve sustainability, true sustainability, speaking about so we have the largest problems we have with the supply chain, and it is untraceable, uncontrollable. Blockchain, well, it could be a solution, but it again, it depends on so many things we can control now. So we switched to implementation of 3D printing and a so-called additive manufacturing for the fashion industry. And I just wanted to give more information about 3D printing because this technology is so emerging that people still often misunderstand it as prints on the fabric. Now, this 3D print, for example, this 3D print garment, pieces of clothing, bags, and other fashion products, just like you can imagine 3D printing of guns. Like everyone can imagine 3D printing of guns with 3D printers, but still not so many people are aware about additive manufacturing, especially for the fashion industry. And this technology caught my attention because it has so many potential benefits, especially in the field of sustainability. The first significant benefit is digitalization. Like what we do, we create the product digitally using CAD type software and computational design. Then we 3D print them in 3D printers. And then it may need some assembly and post-processing. So all these three stages can be done in the same facility. And moreover, the material direction, the development of material direction now is in a way that we will be able to use the materials, to recycle materials literally hundreds and thousands times without losing of their quality. So at the end of the life cycle of the product, we can turn this product into material again and let's say turn this 3D printed skirt into a 3D printed bag and so on. Also we have other opportunities even today, even with the conventional materials, just because of this zero supply chain. We have radical decrease of CO2 emissions of the product, of water usage, of waste and pollution along the production cycle, because with 3D printing, it literally, in many cases, if it's done right, it's close to zero.
Are there any other cool technologies that you're aware of that we might not be aware of in the sustainable fashion space that we should be thinking about?
Of course, today we have a number of technologies which are influencing and will influence the fashion industry even more. We see how fast artificial intelligence is being developed, and most of sales today, especially in large companies, are data-driven. Blockchain will be developed for sure. And speaking about the clothing production, I think that I see the potential at the intersection of additive manufacturing and biotechnology. Especially that would permit us to 3D print clothing using living cells not living biological materials.
Yeah, there's some really exciting stuff happening. I think that's gonna change the landscape. But maybe touching back on one of Amy's points, which was it's hard to get consumers to change their behaviors, and it's also hard to get consumers to part with their money. So what are, there's, surveys have come out where consumers say that, like 68% say that they are willing to buy more sustainably. But when it comes to actually buying, they don't necessarily take those actual steps. So this is really a question for everyone. What are the trends that you've seen? What kind of tactics are you employing? Can you just sort of comment on consumer behavior?
I'll take a stab at that. I think that some of the new business models can really help. In our case, one of our goals was to really bring exceptional luxury quality to the market at a price that was actually less than the prevailing market price, despite a higher cost base. And we've really approached that in two ways. One is just the direct-to-consumer model, which at this point is very well known. But I think a model that is more applicable to a wide range of businesses is also just embedding circular economy with your own business. And so one of the things that we're really excited about doing is offering resale, which will really help to democratize quality. So, I think that it is really important to communicate to the customer that the cost base is higher, and probably to do that in a little bit more detail than we have as a group historically. I think that people do respond to facts and information, and when you can actually break down the relative price of a garment. And I think in particular, the wage part of things really has to be further articulated. I think there's an underappreciation of what it really means and costs to pay a living wage. And most people, I think, would choose to do so if they understand that the alternative would be really problematic. So more information and new business models, I think, will help a lot.
I also think that wider adoption of sustainable practices becoming the norm, encouraged by disincentives put out by the government, by policy, for those companies who don't take responsibility. For example, taxes on carbon, or forcing or requiring companies to report on how they're taking responsibility for their waste, for their product once it leaves their hands, for their carbon use, et cetera, I think could really make a difference. I just happened to have finished just now, right before coming on this webinar, reviewing the Biden climate plan. I don't mean to bring politics into this, but it's just really interesting because if somebody like Joe Biden were to get into office, these are the kinds of initiatives that he's going to put forth, which would be requiring companies to take more responsibility for their environmental footprint. And if that happens, those that don't do anything will perhaps be forced to pay a fine, et cetera. And that might raise the cost of so-called kind of conventional goods going forward. It remains to be seen if this could work, but it's an interesting possibility.
Yeah, so kind of touching on something you just said and something that Vanessa just said. So looking at outsourcing and paying a living wage, and government regulation on brands to be responsible or pay for cleanup. Looking at that sort of in light of the recent Black Lives Matter movement growing, and looking at also the recent, I don't know if you guys heard about the expose of Everlane that was in the New York Times recently, and sort of how they were treating some of their corporate staff. What kind of role does the fashion industry need to play both upstream, looking at their corporate offices, in their manufacturing operations, and then downstream in how they're marketing to consumers about their practices and their values, in order to, how do they change to become more truly diverse? That's a tricky one.
Change starts at home. You got to clean up your own practices first, and then look at every single place that your business touches, your own purchasing, practices, your interactions with customers, how you market, but it has to start at home first. Otherwise, it's not authentic and genuine.
Yeah, I'll just second that. I think that there's been this conversation around transparency for the last 5 to 10 years without a tremendous amount of information to really back it up. And I think to Amy's point, what transparency really allows is to live the same internal truth that you're articulating outward. And I think that we're going to see a lot of customers start to demand that in light of the conversations of the last 3-4 months, or at least, we hope so. So we really think about those architectures for accountability, both internal facing and external facing.
Yeah, this is Danielle. I actually just had a conversation like this about this with a colleague, kind of aligning the work that we do and trying to move, for example, a large corporation, right? A system toward change would be radical change for a system to look at their business model from a sustainability lens. And so when you look at the society we've established from an equity lens, and what kind of upheaval, right, we have had to see that kind of change socially, that's the kind of quieter upheaval that has to happen in particularly these larger corporations, in order for us to move in that direction. And how do we maintain order and structure and comfort that people want, but also move this ship in the right direction, I think is a challenge. But it was just 2 days ago, I was having the conversation paralleling the Black Lives Matter movement and actually moving towards sustainability. And I'm not certainly trying to belittle the Black Lives Matter movement or our movement for equity at all, in the least bit, but the idea is that this is real systematic change that gets at the core of all participants, right? Because we have all had to agree to some extent, victims and perpetrators alike, in an existing system. And when we decide to toss that system up, what's the new system going to look like, right? So not sustainability, not greenwashing for the sake of greenwashing, not sustainability for the sake of sustainability, but a way of thinking in which the word sustainability actually comes out of the context.
Yeah, that actually leads well into my next question, which is also about systemic change in the fashion industry, which is really the fact that the model currently for most brands is based on consumption. And with the pollution and waste aspects of the industry, how are established brands really going to have to shift to address this? I mean, that, like you said, this is going to be a sort of large systemic change. And what does a fashion industry that's not based on consumption even look like?
May I kick that off? I know I just spoke, I'm sorry, but we're just talking about this. I think, for instance, Wrangler jeans has not been something I think that people have perceived as synonymous with the sustainable fashion movement, right? But I can't tell you that since I've taken this position, how many people, the moment I say who I work for, they want to tell me a story about the Wrangler jeans they've had for 30 years, right? So, there's a real opportunity for us to even look internally and see the durability of our product as being part of our, the sustainable value that we bring to the customer, or the sustainable value in the product that's brought to the customer. I don't think we always thought of durability as sustainability, but it really is.
Julia, I'd love to hear from you too, given.
Yeah, absolutely. I see several directions, and all of them in the technological scope. The first way is that is for sure the changing of the role and functions of clothing and the fashion products in general. And for example, now we see the development of so-called virtual fashion. This is just the beginning. This direction will be developing. So we will see more and more fashion in artificial and mixed reality space in the gaming industry. And I believe that this is a place for many brands. The second scenario that I can imagine that is the appearance of kind of technological fashion products in the market. Just imagine Tesla, iPhone, Beyond Meat in the food market. And this type of products will appear for sure in the fashion industry. And in this case, imagine that people will be happy to have smart, sustainably produced pieces of clothing, and one or two of these pieces of clothing will be enough. And imagine that this kind of clothing will be also so revolutionary that all the rest of the wardrobes will be simply not needed anymore. And one more possible scenario, that's the increasing of complexity of the product. And that is actually all of these scenarios could be possible with the additive manufacturing and computational design development. We see these directions developing in other industries, and I believe that with the proper use of them in the fashion industry, we can shift from the kind of economy of scale business model in the fashion industry to these new opportunities for the companies and new opportunities for like turning the consumers into kind of creators, something like that.
Wow, a lot of that went over my head, but I mean, that sounds like a really beautiful vision for us to shoot.
Yeah, despite it may sound quite complex, all these directions are being under development, and yeah, so that's not the focused for long term. It's a short term perspective. Even in 2021, 22, we will see the huge change. Yeah, you may see how fast the artificial intelligence technology has been developed. It took just 1 year for implementation of artificial intelligence technologies, the technology by all the main market players in the fashion industry.
Wow. So, I mean, related to that, another sort of interesting trend that's happening around us right now is with COVID. So many brands are shuttering because sales have just dropped precipitously. So how do we see that shaping the future of fashion? Are people going to go back to stores? Are people going to change their behaviors around shopping? Can you prognosticate for us a little bit on that?
I mean, I do think that once the scare of the pandemic is past, it could be probably will be months before that's the case. Once the vaccine is ready and then distributed, so it could be well into 2021, and then people feel much more comfortable going out and kind of resuming their prior activity, their prior level activity. That's when things will start to settle back down. But I do think, we're all being forced to rethink how we sell, how we buy and how we sell right now. And some of those practices will probably last beyond once the pandemic scare passes, because there may be another pandemic down the road, you never know. So some of these practices will stay with us, and we're all trying to reinvent what it means to be a retailer in this day and age, and trying to get comfortable with digital, trying to get comfortable with also the idea of maybe it's not just about product, it's also about what else can we sell, services, other, who knows. And also maybe we all don't need to be as big as we were, and we certainly don't all need the amount of stuff we have. So I think this idea of constriction or contraction is looming for many of us as well.
Vanessa, did you want to chime into that?
Well, I mean, I really broadly agree. I think that these circumstances have really taught us how much we really need, which is not a lot, actually. At the same time, and this is colored a little bit by, living in New York City and seeing how desperate people have been to, get out on the streets at any moment possible. I do think that we are inherently social beings, and clothing is this really unique means of personal expression. And I love what Julia was saying about the virtual world, because I think some of the way that we express ourselves is certainly moving online into this, particularly younger generations, into this virtual gaming world. But I do think that clothing will continue to play such a deep role in everyone's lives. It just may morph as the technology evolves. But hopefully, the fewer better things philosophy will prevail. And I think, to Amy's point, we've been in this growth for growth's sake mode as a society globally for decades, if not more. And we're just hitting up against every possible boundary of that system, whether planetary and otherwise. And it will require a real rethink about, adding genuine value and how big we really need to be, and profitability over size for economic longevity also.
Yeah, so maybe from there I can ask a question targeted very much for the Bethesda Green audience, which is, given all of these factors and the fact that our world is very much in flux right now, kind of where do you guys see some of the biggest opportunities for entrepreneurs in the sustainable fashion space?
I'll chime in. I mentioned hemp earlier, and I've been researching hemp to understand more about the crop and the product and how it's cultivated. And there are a limited number of growers still in the United States, right? So not only are there a limited number of growers, because of course it had been criminalized, the growth of hemp had been criminalized, and it was decriminalized really in 2014 and again in 2018, really opened up the market, but not only the growing of it, but actually the processing of it, and not just for use for CBD oils, if that's what people are interested, but also the opportunity to be a supplier for hemp fibers. And so the more research I do, I'm like, there's actually a big opening, a big hole in the US market for growers and processors for hemp. And I think there's real opportunity there for us to be local suppliers of that, and for entrepreneurs to find a way to be suppliers of that. I mean, it seems like it could be a fun and easy to grow crop.
So I just want to build on that, because actually we were having a very similar conversation, at Eileen Fisher yesterday, and not specifically around hemp, but I will say there are a number of small independent hemp farms, at least in the New York area, and I agree completely. What's lacking is the intermediary processes to get it from fiber to fabric. And at this point, what we'd have to do is send it offshore to have it woven. But that's true of other fibers as well. And I'm thinking about linen, flaxed linen, and organic. And all of these for us would have to be organic, but organic cotton to finished product, to finished material product. So all of these are opportunities, and that's just on the ag side. I think large scale manufacturing is missing here in the States. Any of us larger brands, we're not even anymore such a larger brand, but even at the size that we're at, there really isn't a large enough kind of manufacturing base here to really rely on for longevity, for our product to be produced. So there's lots of opportunities in that regard. And I think circular, presents many opportunities, especially when it comes to, there are a couple of places that I think of. One is the kind of the collection and sorting and kind of refeeding the sorted goods back to the brands, for example, to make something new out of them. And also what's the word I'm looking for? taking apart the disassembly of products and or fabric into, so that we can remake it into new fiber, all of that would be an opportunity. I'll stop there.
Vanessa?
I'll just wholeheartedly second that. We are desperate to create local supply chains here in the States. And I think everything that's just been said is exactly the challenge. And it's just these intermediate parts of the supply chain in the US have been decimated, even in the traditional construct of the last 30 years. So there's such huge opportunity. And we love to spend time on the farm and talk to the farmers. I think that there is a huge amount of opportunity in the agricultural space, but they're desperate also to link into these supply chains and really finding a hard time with partners. So I do think, you know, agriculture and manufacturing, utilizing technology is totally where it's at right now. And there's been so much in the last year, even prior to this pandemic, that I think has just woken up so many countries and companies rather to their supply chain risks. It happened even, you know, during the trade issues that started last year. So I think there's just a tremendous amount of demand there from US companies and multinationals to look for new supply chains.
Yeah, that's super interesting too, because in my own work doing, looking at textile recycling, one of the biggest challenges that I noticed in the sort of downstream recycling industry is really that the fibers there's no market for it, you know, because they're so mixed and they're so hard to take apart. There are very limited numbers of buyers. So even if you find a recycler, and talking about traditional mechanical recycling where they literally shred the garments and turn them into new stuff, the main buyers of that stuff are in the automotive and housing industries. They're highly regulated. And so when they're buying from recyclers, they say, we don't want any clothing in our content. We only want stuff like linens and sheets that's 100% cotton, 100%, or, you know, so that when it comes to recycling clothing, if there's no market for it, there's not going to be anyone willing to do it. So I think there's a big opportunity there also from my research.
Yeah, development of new materials, or so-called new generation of materials. Today, I see lots of opportunities here. Like we have today the new emerging materials like the cactus leather, orange peels leather, and so on. And this direction, mushroom leather, will be developing. And also, I would say that you can develop new materials for 3D printing. This industry is also booming. Like we have new materials coming here. I see a lot of potential here at the intersection of material science, technology, fashion, agriculture, as Vanessa said as well.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, entrepreneurs, I hope you heard that. There's lots of opportunities out there for you guys. A question we got from an audience member was, I'm interested in the steps needed for consumers to understand the true cost of fashion. So looking at labor, wages, and impact. Yet, is it also possible to keep fashion accessible for all? So maybe like, how can we educate consumers better about how much, you know, the cost of the energy and resources and manpower that are going in to making an individual garment? I think if people really knew how, we're able to see that whole sort of cost value chain, they would be quite shocked, especially when they walk into a store and, you know, see t-shirts for $10.
I guess I would just say, you know, expose the information and make that normal. You know, as a small brand, that's one of the things that, one of the areas that we feel like we can strongly contribute is just by making transparency an expectation as opposed to something strange. So I think just breaking it down into the various components. And then, you know, I think really sunlight is the best disinfectant. And once that becomes the consumer norm, then I think more and more people will just have to do that. And then, you know, you start to look at it and I think consumers do understand that it doesn't add up. You know, a $10 t-shirt how can that possibly support somebody's livelihood? You start to ask, many more questions. So I think, customers are quite intelligent, and giving them the power of the information to make their own choices is the best possible way to do that. But you have to track it yourself first. And a lot of companies, and I mean, you've done so much work, Amy, at Eileen Fisher. It's incredible. So it's a great example for your firms.
Well, I appreciate the shout out. It is, we've done a lot of work, but you know what? We're not that transparent about our pricing and our costs. And there's a reason for that. I mean, one reason is that it differs depending on where something's produced, and particularly whether it's in the US or elsewhere. And I think that, I don't know that we don't know for sure, but I'm guessing there's probably not a consistent sort of pricing model across the industry, but there's one that's kind of typical, which tends to be, the cost of the actual production doubles when you get it to the wholesale level, and doubles again when you get it to the retail level. But then, of course, to your point, there are all the inputs, and really getting clear on all of that is an enormous task. I'm not sure that we have a handle on it ourselves when we get right down to it. That would require a team of people.
Yeah, it's super complex, right? Another question we got from the audience is looking at parallel efforts at sustainability, looking at sourcing, supply chain, other technologies in adjacent industries that there might be lessons to be learned from, perhaps the furniture, housewares industry. And then what advice would you give to small businesses that are trying to tackle sustainability in a global supply chain across multiple categories of sustainability?
Sure. I can speak to that. As Amy was speaking, I was thinking of some of the scorecards that have been developed. I Googled very quickly, and like the Sustainability Consortium's Beauty and Personal Care Product Sustainability Rating System. And so while that may not capture, right, as the full supply chain, but the idea is, when I'm in the store, I could maybe pull out my phone and scan a barcode and find out a little bit more information about the sourcing for this product, their labor practices, right? Kind of be an informed consumer. And I think those kind of scorecards where, like, for sake of, as you said, normalizing transparency, I mean, I feel like those move us in the right direction, and those are good examples to pull from other industries.
Yeah, I think to your point, the Hague Index is moving towards
Sure.
a consumer-facing something, label or barcode or something. So that would be perhaps the closest kind of critical mass version of what you're talking about.
Any other advice, Amy, that you would give, given your consulting work on some of these issues?
Well, the last part of your question, which was how can a smaller brand or smaller company kind of tackle all of these issues all at once, I think was the gist of what I heard you say. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, I just got a little worried about that. My feeling is, even for a larger company, it's impossible to tackle everything. You really have to choose your battles and start where, I always say start with the product, because the product is usually where the biggest impact is, but start with one aspect of the product, or, it could be, it's usually we're talking about apparel, it's usually in the fiber production. Start with one material or one fiber and dive in there. I mean, trying to tackle everything will make you crazy, and it'll break the bank. So for me, that's one strategy. And another strategy is to go for the lowest hanging fruit, which could be packaging or something else, but that doesn't really get at the heart of the sustainability issue, I'm afraid.
Yeah, that's interesting. We got another question about textile waste, which I can obviously talk about for days, but I won't do that to anyone. So maybe I will punt this question to Danielle. The question was, what can individuals in the DC area do to reduce the creation of textile waste besides donating or doing swaps or buying less? How do we know that our donations are actually ending up somewhere good?
Yeah, I think There are certainly some resources online. I don't want to kind of shout out, or I do want to shout out my old team over at Sustainable DC. So there's resources on Zero Waste DC that for, you know, ideas of what to do with your clothes when they're at the end of their useful life for you. But the idea would be to, before you donate, to ask some simple questions, right? One of the most common questions we got when I was working for the city was about those street corner boxes, right? And if you look at the box and you see not even a website, not a phone number, you know, there's an organization, if you Google it, their website isn't live anymore, right? You want to make sure that this is a, hopefully if you're intending to donate it, that it is a legally recognized nonprofit, but find out a little bit about their mission and their intent and what they do. You know, understand that many of these organizations do in fact sell the clothes to further their mission. So find out what their mission is. And if you agree with, I agree with and support Goodwill's mission, for example. They do plenty of adult education courses and job readiness training. And so that's what the money goes to when you shop at Goodwill. And I support that. So I think connecting and learning more about the mission of the nonprofits you're donating to is an important way to take that extra step. And usually hopefully it's not that hard. And if it's too hard, maybe that's not the right box for you.
Yeah, there's another question, a part of that question, which was, are there any companies that are actually recycling or upcycling clothes in the DC region, or I mean, even more broadly? And I'll say, for one, Eileen Fisher does. They recycle their own garments.
Yes.
Yeah. And
yeah.
So
Patagonia, I think, is another great example. Eileen Fisher is certainly one of my personal favorite. I think the stores that have take-back programs, Madewell, when you take your jeans back to Madewell, they're made into, at least in part, made into housing insulation that's available at, you know, your typical retail big box stores. So again, making those products accessible at, you know, to the public at accessible prices. And so, yeah, please take advantage of those.
I would say also, you know, if you're looking for local brands, look on Instagram. I think there's a lot of great small scale entrepreneurs that are making clothing and other, you know, household items out of old clothes. So check out Instagram and look at, you know, hashtag upcycling and some different hashtags. I think you'll be able to find some pretty cool stuff. So here's a question for everybody. How about using GMO, i.e. GMO cotton versus regular fiber? And maybe we can, you know, you can expand that out to look at organic versus.
Well, we have a particular perspective on it at Eileen Fisher, which is no GMO. GMOs take financial incentive away from the farmers. They take their power away from them. They cause a lot of damage to the environment. Because, well, first of all, you can't, GMO crops don't replicate. So you have to continually, the farmer continually has to purchase new seed to grow more crops every year. And that's, you know, that's just a dead end model right there. So I guess I'll just stop with that. I don't want to get too political about it, but it's not for us.
Vanessa, would you like to comment on that? I'll also have sort of a question I'll tag on to that, which is that I also saw that your company doesn't use polyester, including recycled polyester. Is that correct? And I'd love for you if you could comment on that.
So I guess I'll touch on both. So we're aligned with Amy on the GMO front. And the way that I think about it is, I think as humans, we've introduced a lot of ways to try and scale systems that are fundamentally not supposed to be scaled to the extent that they are. And that's sort of one of the ways that I look at GMO and share Amy's concerns around the financial aspects as well for farmers. So we don't. And by using organic cotton, for example, you do avoid that. So no organic cotton is GMO. In terms of polyester, yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things that we get concerned about is, while we're happy to see people using things like recycled poly, of course, over virgin poly, if that garment needs to be washed, you still have a microfiber problem. And so you're solving one piece of the equation, but not the whole thing. And so especially as a brand new company, you know, we always have the opportunity to say, does it make sense to introduce this new thing into the world if we can't do it to the standard that we think makes sense? And a lot of times the answer is no. And so it's that willingness to just say no. So I think that there are still some just technical challenges around finding alternatives to polyester, including recycled polyester, that I definitely do not pretend to have the solution for. And it's a particular challenge for things like gym clothes, which we have the luxury of not making. So I can't pretend that I have some magic bullet. But really that's part of the lens is, you know, if we can't make it better to solve the major challenge, we just don't do it. But we appreciate that very large companies have, you know, a tall task and a lot of innovation to do, and that many of those products that do use polyester are things that consumers feel fills a need in their lives. So it's not so easy.
So we're going to do 3 more questions. I'm going to come back to you, Vanessa. This one is sort of touches on what you were just saying. So you had really great press at the launch of Another Tomorrow. Apart from an elevated product, what were some of the key aspects that were embodied in getting consumers really excited about the brand?
I think a lot of it came down to this idea of not having to compromise. It was this idea that the aesthetic and the design looked and felt like something really aspirational without necessarily feeling like, oh, the design has to have this old school sense of like what it would look like if it aligned with my values. So I think there was and continues to be a lot of excitement around just that idea of not compromising. I think that's also true in terms of the areas of focus for the company. You know, generally people care about the environment, they care about humans, they care about animals. And by taking this holistic approach to all 3, albeit quite painful to Amy's point, you know, there I think was a sense of not having to trade off between caring about living wages and caring about the environment. It was sort of, you know, that met everyone's sort of standards. And then I think the third thing was just this idea of like connectivity and storytelling. So we have a QR code on each of our care content labels that you can scan and see the overall supply chain. And I think that that has just served to fill this sort of emotional desire to reconnect back to the source of everything that we buy. And for us, that just happens to be clothing. But I think there are so many parallels really in like the farm to table food movement. It's sort of like farm to fabric in our case, or farm to garment. So I think it's really been, you know, those 2 things, but we're very grateful for the reception and the excitement to see more of this from many companies.
That's awesome. And I'm going to do a question for you, Julia, from the audience. Do you think consumers might ever be able to be counted on to help sort different types of items for recycling or reuse? If pieces of fashion could be separated, what might that look like? And maybe even if fibers could be separated, what might that look like?
That's a good question. A good question because and what we offer is just shift from the conventional fashion industry to the completely new system, which permits to separate, to recycle, and to use again. But yes, I'm sure that what we really need to do to make the fashion industry more sustainable, which is to make the calculation of the environmental and social impact for each product public, and maybe to make it obligatory for every company. Because today, it was mentioned today, many companies are not aware of for instance, the real CO2 emissions of their certain product. They don't have figures, they don't calculate this, and consumers are not aware too. And when you see a brand who call themselves as a sustainable brand, it could be like reduction of CO2 emissions in 5% or in 100%. In both these cases, this brand will be called sustainable. I think that it is not honest. So instead of using the word sustainable, I would make the marks how many tons of CO2 emissions it would take, how many waste this product is were produced because of this product, and all these characteristics, all these parameters are possible to calculate. We have the tools, we have the formulas, we just need to do it, and to calculate the entire supply chain. And actually, when we do this, we can find very interesting things. And these things even could change our imagination about sustainability. Because, for instance, we can use organic cotton, but because of the long supply chain, this organic cotton t-shirt will have a long CO2 trace. And the number of kilograms of CO2 will be probably even more than the same t-shirt made of polyester. So yeah, and this kind of questions connected to the picture what we get, having all this calculation could be completely different from what we think about sustainable fashion. For example, when we launched the 3D printed bags, we made the calculations of our impact, and we found that because of our digital design and 3D printing and so-called zero supply chain, we radically reduced CO2 emissions. And just because we used TPU, it's like polymer type of materials, we got about 10 kilograms of CO2 emissions per bag. At the same time, the average leather bag in the market is responsible for 200 CO2 kilogram of CO2 emissions. So you see the difference, 10 kilograms and 200.
Yeah. So we just have a couple of minutes left here. So I'm going to ask our last question to the whole panel, which is the magic wand question. If you could wave a magic wand today and make a lasting impact on the future of the fashion industry moving forward, what would you do? Who wants to start?
I would bring sewing back. I would bring it back. You know, I always tell the story. I had to make that apron with a little pocket in it before I got out of middle school. I would bring sewing back as a pastime, as a hobby, as something to be celebrated, and something as a social activity, because I think even if we still continue to buy clothes, we would appreciate the artistry and the work that went into them.
Awesome. Vanessa?
I would say transparency. So if we could really move the needle dramatically on where the baseline was for transparency, I think that would change things enormously and engender a lot of curiosity that connected to what Danielle was saying, I think would lead to a lot more appreciation of the things that we buy.
Amy?
Well, I got the sewing down, but I think for me, it's really getting clear on what we mean when we say we're having impact or we're not having impact. Because when I think about just taking carbon as an example, reducing carbon emissions to what end? Like, what's the ultimate net result of that? I think that we as a collective society need to understand that better in order to make sense out of the transparency and the data that we're talking about here.
Julia?
Today, threats to sustainability are coming from two main sources, the conventional industry and new technologies as well. Taking into consideration a huge and growing role of artificial intelligence, big data, biotech, I think I would and hopefully will be able to contribute here to at least be sure that these technologies will be used for sustainability. And as these technologies are becoming essential in every business and in the fashion industry in particular, I think that, and as each technology, like technologies are not deterministic. People decide what to do with the technologies. Each technology can be used for sustainability or against it. So I see my role here.
And I'll chime in as well and say that if I could wave a magic wand, I would say that I would want all designers to really think about the end in mind when they are developing their products. And so that was our last question. I wanted to say thank you to all of our amazing panelists. This was, I thought it was a super interesting conversation. I'm so glad to have met and re-met all of you. And I will hand it back off to Patty.
Thank you all, Kaveri. This was wonderful. Amy, Vanessa, Danielle, Julia. Thank you all for taking the time out of your schedules today to join us and share from the wells of wisdom that you have from all of your experience with everyone. We will be sharing a summary blog of today's session on our website shortly, along with a link to the YouTube video. So if you missed something and you want to get back in and hear what was said, we'll make that available for everyone as well. Thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your day. Stay safe, stay healthy. We hope to see you again soon. Bye.
Bye.